Welcome to Pleasure Uprising. I'm Dr. Laura Juergens, intimacy coach, somatic practitioner, and your guide to getting out of your head and into your body, your desire, and your real capacity for connection. This show is for people who are done performing and ready to actually feel it. Let's go. Hey, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. We're going to talk about power play and BDSM and what happens when things kind of go off the rails, what you need to know in order to make it hot, and in particular, what you need to know about negotiations for any sort of power play. A lot of people want to avoid this stuff and just sort of, oh, I trust this person, it'll be fine, without actually doing the negotiation. And we're going to talk about why that's so tempting and also why it's really problematic and can get you into some trouble and some danger. And I'm going to start by telling you a little story. So I had a couple. We're going to call them Sam and Tina. She's in her mid-40s. She's a therapist. He's like early 50s, really cerebral. They've been doing a lot of power play, bondage, degradation, really high intensity stuff for years. And then it went to shit. So the reason they come to me is because she's completely stopped wanting sex. He couldn't get turned on without BDSM, without feeling dominant, according to him. And they started massively triggering each other because on the one hand, he's feeling super rejected. On the other, she's feeling this trigger from pressure. They had a sexless relationship at this point. There was lots of hurt and resentment. And when we dug just a tiny bit under the surface, what we found was really smart. These people are both very smart. They're very competent. They care about each other. They actually have really good communication. But you know what they had never done? They had never done an actual proper power or BDSM negotiation because both of them felt like it was quote unquote hotter to skip it and that they quote unquote trusted each other. So this is what caused all of the problems. Skipping the BDSM negotiation led to the slippery slope of a sexless relationship with lots of hurt and resentment, massively triggering each other, and her not being able to find her libido anymore. And I want to talk about how that happened and why it happened. But I also want to talk about why it's so tempting to skip it. And it's really understandable for even very smart, thoughtful, aware people to be really tempted to skip it. I want to also talk about whose job it is to make sure it happens and how to make the negotiation itself hot so that you actually want to do it. And I also want to, of course, talk about how not to ruin your libido and traumatize yourself or your partner. So we're going to do a little roadmap here today. This is a little different than, I'm going to give you some of the sort of standard BDSM resources in the show notes, but this is a little different of an episode about power play because I think a lot of BDSM and kink resources out there assume a level of advanced play that isn't necessarily appropriate for everybody or isn't necessarily what's going on. And sometimes just assume that you're going to do this negotiation. And so many people don't. And I've consulted with other therapists who come to me because they want to know how to help clients on the other side of this. It is what I described with Sam and Tina is not uncommon. People frequently skip BDSM or power play negotiation, suffer serious consequences in their relationship or in their sexuality for it, and then go to therapy or counselors trying to fix it after the fact. And I want to help you avoid this pitfall and really understand at any level of kinky business or any level of power play, whether you think you're doing anything hardcore or not. It's actually usually the really amateur sort of early stage stuff that can really get you into a lot of trouble. It's like people people who do the most extreme sports are the ones who wear the helmets. The people who just like try it out for the weekend get traumatic brain injuries because they don't wear a helmet because they don't think they're that hardcore. So this kind of thing happens with kink and BDSM too. So what we're going to do today, here's what's coming. We're going to talk about why people actually want to do power play and kink in the first place, what it's actually doing for us. And we're going to talk a little bit on terminology just to make sure everybody's on the same page. And that does matter more than you think. We're going to talk about what negotiation really is. And it's often not what people expect it to be. We're going to talk about what happens when you skip it. I know I just gave you a little horror story, but we're going to talk about why what happens when you skip it does happen so that you understand why that happened. And we'll talk about how to make negotiations genuinely fun and erotic instead of clinical, what your takeaways should be and what you can actually do. And then I'm going to give you some resources because there is no need for anyone to reinvent the wheel here. There are great resources out there. I am not going to try to replace those here. My purpose is to just make sure you use them. And I will link some of them at the end too. Okay, number one, why do we crave this stuff in the first place? So many people do. Now, look, a lot of people think that they crave power play when actually what they're really wanting is attention and attunement. They don't really want power play per se, but a lot of people do want power play, and that's all good. And if you want both attention, attunement, and power play, that's also fun too. So we're not really specifically talking today about the attention attunement piece. I think that is one piece that is really, but I want to say something about it, which is that I think it's really missing from a lot of the mainstream basic conversations about power dynamics in the bedroom, is that actually what a lot of people, they think they want power, but what they really want is they really crave a partner who's really resourced and grounded in themselves so that they don't have to caretake. And I've said this on this podcast before. If you've been listening for a while, you've heard me say this. I'm going to keep beating this drum because I don't think enough people are beating this drum. So I'm going to keep saying that. But if you want to play with the idea of being dominated, okay, I just got a frog in my throat, but hopefully I just got him out. If you want to play around with the idea of being dominated or dominating someone else, it's really important to realize that that's not about aggression. It's really about stepping out of our everyday identity. Most of us walk around in our everyday identities kind of on autopilot. We're a professional, we're a parent, we're a partner, we're a quote unquote responsible adult. Sometimes we step out of that and we're with our hobbies or with our friends, right? But we're still in this sort of defined area of our identity. If you can think about all the possible identities of humans on this large spectrum, we all sort of give ourselves a particular slot. And we've decided, okay, this is me. Now, sometimes, a lot of the time, most of the time, the world has defined some of that for us, but we've also often done some of it ourselves. Regardless of where it came from, we're walking around in this sort of subset of all the possible identities. Power play and kink in particular, and they are different. You don't have to play with power to play with kink. Kink is kind of the larger sphere, and then power play is one subset of that. But these are a chance to step out into different aspects of ourselves and really explore different identities. And this is really play in the truest mammalian sense, right? The animal sense of play. It's not frivolous. It's not immature. Play is a fundamental human need. And this type of sexy play for adults is a way to play with our partners in a way where we can expand our identities, explore our deep emotional needs, and really allow ourselves to step into different identities than we might walk around in day to day. So specifically for power dynamics, some of the things that draw people to them are the freedom of surrender. which is this putting down the weight of being in charge. And that is so appealing to many of us, especially if we spend a lot of time having to be the leader, having to be in charge of things. The freedom of actually being able to give that up is intoxicating. There's also the aliveness of authority, where we inhabit power consciously and intentionally and take power into ourselves, step into a powerful part of ourselves that maybe we don't feel safe or comfortable or accepted inhabiting a lot of the time. There's also the erotic charge of transgression, doing something that feels forbidden in a really fun way. Or role play as this identity exploration. Who else am I underneath who I have to be every day? None of this is pathological. And in fact, there's research that shows that BDSM practitioners are actually, in this one study in particular, they showed that they were psychologically, on average, according to the metrics that they were scoring, healthier than the general population. The whole point is that it's play. And play requires a container to be safe enough to actually let go inside, right? And when we played when we were kids, we would have rules and we would set out those rules and we would negotiate those rules with each other. And that's what allowed us to have fun times where it didn't just devolve into a whole bunch of fighting, right? So rules are important in play. So here's a section where we talk about terminology. I'm going to take a little digression into terminology before we come back to what we need to do to make that play safe and create that container. So words people use matter, of course, and it's not because there's one right way, but because knowing the distinctions actually helps you have better conversations. So I'm just going to give you, there's so many, everything in the world has jargon, and power play, BDSM, kink, there's so much jargon. I encourage you to learn it if you want. It does make conversation easier with people about it, especially if you're in the sort of community. That's the case for every sort of niche interest, right? There's going to be some jargon, but some real basics today. We're not going into the details. Top and bottom. Top and bottom refers to in-scene roles only. Like you are going to be a top and bottom in this particular setting for the time agreed upon. The top being the person who's giving structure, taking a more dominant or powerful role, oftentimes also the person giving sensation or direction during a scene. The bottom is the person who is following during the scene. A lot of times that is also the person who's receiving or surrendering. But you don't have to be the one. You can top from the bottom where you can be giving direction while receiving. So there are nuances here. But the key thing to remember is for topping and bottoming, when the scene ends, when that agreed upon time to play ends, the power dynamic ends. It's also important to know when people actually talk about doming and subbing that in official BDSM land, that is an ongoing relational dynamic. So I've actually had quite a few people that have come to me because they've gotten into relationship challenges simply because they thought they were talking about one thing and they wound up talking about another. Or they thought they agreed to one thing, but they wound up accidentally agreeing to another because the other person had a different definition. So somebody says, do you want to be in a dom sub dynamic with me? They're talking about a power exchange extending beyond the scene into how you communicate, make decisions, and relate day to day in your relationship. And that is a much bigger container, requires a much bigger conversation, often a written contract. It is a serious relationship commitment. And you want to make sure when somebody's talking about dom sub dynamics that they're clarify whether they're actually talking. They might be just talking about topping and bottoming in scene roles only. In practice, lay people outside of the BDSM community tend to use these interchangeably, and that's fine. It's totally okay. Language evolves, but it's just worth knowing if you start playing with more experienced people in the community that you could be inadvertently agreeing to a longer dynamic where, for example, you're done having sex, you think, okay, I'm I'm going to go back and make some decisions now, and I'm going to decide what I want for dinner, and the person is not open to you deciding what you want for dinner because that is not what they think you agreed to. Okay. So as that an aside, a note also on just finding community and learning. If you want to go that deep into BDSM, I really want to encourage you to find local community. This is a craft. There are people who have spent years learning it. One of the best places to start is just informal public meetups, usually at a restaurant, street clothes, no play, just people. They're called munches. You can find them on FetLife, which is like Facebook for kinksters. Not all teachers or mentors are created equal. So do your homework, ask for references, trust your gut, be very discerning. And you do literally need to learn the ropes. Apprenticeship and community are how that knowledge gets passed on responsibly. I do work with clients directly on this, not just on the repair side after something's gone wrong. I am not by any means a professional trainer of DOMs and subs, but I do like soft topping and bottoming training, and I do help people begin to play with kinks. But there's a lot of great professional trainers in kink out there and in power dynamics. I highly recommend learning from them directly. There's people like Sunny Megatron, Midori, Bex Caputo. They all have great resources. I will link them in the show notes. But look, none of the resources matter if you don't use them, don't think you need to, or don't bother. And so often people think they don't need to look at the formal resources because they are just sort of, we're just dipping a toe in, right? And then, months or years down the road, you're stuck in a situation where it is escalated and you've never had negotiations and shit's hit the fan like it did for Sam and Tina. Okay, so let's look at what negotiation actually is. How do we set the container well without making it a bummer? And I think people generally avoid it or think that they don't want to do it because they're imagining like a liability waiver, a clipboard, some sort of mood killer. But I want to say, done well, the container negotiation, the safety discussion is actually the sexiest first act of the play scene. What we know from one of the, early psychological researchers in sexuality, Jack Morin, he has a book called The Erotic Mind. One of the things that Morin found was that desire is usually intensified by anticipation for a lot of people, by moving towards something with intention and attention. And a well-held negotiation conversation is that. You're not just like filling out forms. You are co-creating playfully the space and like starting to set the whole mood of the encounter. Now, look, you can do it in a really like clipboard form filling out way, which is I don't recommend because it is a bummer. But you do not need to do it that way. And the best way is to not do it that way because you're going to want to do it again if it's fun. And if it's not fun, it's going to feel awkward and it's not going to turn you on. And then you won't have as much anticipation for the actual event, right? So let's make everything fun from the beginning. And you know who brings the fun? You do. You bring the fun. You and your partner decide on purpose, this is going to be flirty. This is going to be fun. We're going to set the mood. We're going to enjoy ourselves by having a really wonderful, in-depth conversation about what we want and what we don't want. And this is actually where you find that out. This is actually where you start learning what your partner wants. And you know what? Learning what your partner wants is hot. You get to picture it. You get to think about it. You get to anticipate. So don't deny yourself that joy. And so here's where, I think Sam and Tina, they went into power play, assuming that having a safety conversation ahead of time about what the boundaries were, what they really wanted, what the aftercare plan was going to be, they assumed that that was all too much of a bummer and that it wasn't required if they quote unquote trusted each other. But they never actually talked about what they really needed and where the boundaries were ahead of time. And there's a really big problem with that. We're going to talk about this. But I also want to say negotiation, this sexy conversation, this is not a one-time thing. Desires change, bodies change, relationships change. They change daily. Negotiation is ongoing for every time you're going to play with power dynamics or kinky things, especially if they carry any risk of harm, psychological, emotional, or physical harm. So I think one of the things that's really important to understand is and what Sam and Tina didn't understand is when you decide you're going to skip this conversation, that is actually the rookie move. Quick break. If you are listening to this show, something in your intimate life may not be where you want it to be. And if you've been trying to think or talk your way through it and it's not quite working, that's not a you problem. That's just a method problem. I made a free guide to help called Get Out of Your Head, a starter guide to releasing the pressure, shame, and shoulds around intimacy. It has some reflection exercises that go deeper than anything you'll typically find in a freebie, and most people feel something shift after just the first one. So go grab it at laurajurgens.com/guide, and the link is in the show notes. People who are playing with like extreme edge play and like really intense, potentially harmful kinky shit, they are not skipping these negotiations. The pros are not skipping it. It's the rookies that are skipping it. And the most common harms are when you are skipping this. So people, now look, not always. There are some people who play with pretty extreme stuff and will not use guardrails, and I would never encourage anybody to play with them. But the really seasoned pros out there who are highly respected in the community, they are doing the negotiations always. Hardcore scene or light scene, they are doing it. It's amateurs who are playing with fire by skipping it and getting hurt, right? So one of the important things to understand, and one of the things that these pros do understand, is the neuroscience of subspace. So what we mean by subspace is this sensation, the emotional and sensory place that you get when you are bottoming in a scene, when you have given over your power, when you have truly surrendered, a thing called subspace happens. And it is the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of your brain that can assess new information. It can assess consequences. It, is the planning, most sort of newly evolved part of the human brain. It measurably downregulates in subspace. It is our monitoring mind, and it releases. And that's a good thing. That's the whole point. It's what people want. It's why they want to do it. But it also means in that place, your capacity to actually track your own limits is massively reduced. If you are experienced, you know this. You know that in the moment when you're in subspace, you can easily override your own boundaries without even registering it. Your body will register it, and it will like hold on to it for later, sometimes for much later. And you can have major, traumas that happen, but your mind isn't monitoring that in the moment because it's literally lost the capacity to do that. And so experienced practitioners have built the negotiation protocols, the safety architecture around BDSM to be in place before anyone gets into subspace. And so I want to explain what it feels like. I've felt the subspace in very rare times when I've encountered someone skilled enough and who I trust enough to truly talk to me. So one really easy example to describe to you is in a training. I was actually in a training on BDSM practices with my friend Wayne, who is a very attractive gay man who is very gay. He had no interest in having sex with me. His energy is so good. I felt so safe that when we were role playing, it was so incredible. It was such a giant turn on. I was just overcome with this wave of yes. Like his energy was so grounded, so good that I just felt like I was totally down for anything. And in that moment, I was so turned on and I was so willing to relinquish all power that he could have literally done anything and I would have been into it in the moment. And then I would have had a problem later. We were playing with that so that we could see how it would feel like and why we need the container negotiation. And it really landed for me so hard because I was even in that space way longer than I expected to be. That space stuck with me for like a good 24 hours. And I was vulnerable but only to him. And this is why it's really important for the person in the bottoming role, whoever is going to be submitting or surrendering responsibility. They need to be an architect in the negotiation, not a passenger. And this is where sometimes new subs or overly trusting subs or bottoms will often want to skip this work precisely because they crave the subspace so hard. They want to jump into it too fast. And here's the thing, you cannot do that and be safe. You cannot abrogate your responsibility to set up the container for your future self. It is not fair to your top, and it is not fair to future you who has to live with the consequences. And you can't leave it to your partner to figure out where your boundaries are. That gives them an impossible task. You're saying lead without a map, carry full responsibility if anything goes wrong. That is not fair. And so even if you are tempted because you want to surrender, you want to play with power stuff, you're just like, just take charge. I'll be fine. No, that is how you get into trouble. You have to take responsibility to have the conversation, decide in advance and decide conservatively because you can always play again if it goes well. A lot of real BDSM out in the world, there's not even any sexy shit going on. It's just the power dynamic. They're not bringing sex into it. Sometimes they're going to bring something sexy, but it's not going to be penetrative sex. I highly recommend not starting with penetrative sex in your first power play sessions. Wait, start light. Make sure that the dynamic is feeling good. Err on the side of conservative boundaries. Let yourself feel good, have a good experience, and then say, hey, why don't we try this other thing next time? And so, back to Sam and Tina, her limits were crossed repeatedly, not maliciously. Her partner genuinely didn't know. Sam didn't know where Tina's limits were. She hadn't even fully registered the crossings in the moment, and her body only registered them later. And in fact, it was really slow and cumulative, and her nervous system just started drawing a conclusion that this isn't safe. And it shut down her desire for sex. She was experiencing pain with penetration. She could not bear the idea of bottoming, and she wanted absolutely nothing to do with sex. And her partner, he felt like BDSM was really his only way into arousal. And he thought he couldn't get turned on without dominance. But it turned out, actually, in our work together, that actually subbing was great for him. And he did want BDSM, but what he was craving was he was always craving subbing. He was getting it vicariously through her when he was topping her. And what he really needed was help being in his body, and subbing gave him that. So we were able to wiggle the dynamic so that she could be in the dominant role and still feel safe. But we weren't able to go back. They were not able to go back because her nervous system would not let them go back to the previous dynamic. And so damage can really look like over time, your body just starting to tell you, hey, I have no desire anymore, or I don't trust this person, or just losing capacity for being even in relationship with someone. So it's worth it to err on the side of caution. And one of the best ways you can give that to yourself is by actually making the caution conversation, the safety conversation, genuinely fun and erotic. So here's what we do. Number one, you make it a desire-forward negotiation, not just limit-focused. So we don't just talk about what you won't do, that matters, but you actually want to start with what you want. Name what you want to feel too, your actual erotic emotions that you want to have, how you want to feel in your body, how you want to feel emotionally, not just what am I willing to do, what am I not willing to do, not just that. Start with the desires first. And hey, look, does that sound vulnerable? Yeah, it is. But if you're not willing to get vulnerable, then why are you doing this, right? A big piece of this is about vulnerability. It's about stepping into the ability to be vulnerable with someone and allowing that to be a growth area and allowing both of you to have safety to do that. So yeah, you do got to be a little vulnerable. You got to ask for what you want. Okay, number 2, the identity dimension. Bring in, who do you want to be? What characters or archetypes or energies do you want to inhabit? Tell your partner that. Can you imagine how hot that is? It's so amazing. And this is where role plays can get really interesting. Not just what do you want to do, but who do you want to become? And that is something that, you get to play with and let your imagination run wild. And then who does your partner want to be in relation to that, right? And you can co-create this whole thing together where you get to step into these energies and archetypes together. Number 3, the energy question. What energy from a partner helps you open up? What just helps you melt? What energy shuts you down? These are very different conversations than talking about activities. Someone can do the same thing with a completely different energy and your body will respond completely differently. That is facts. And if you don't believe in energy, come see me, talk to me, I will demonstrate. But essentially, you can just imagine into, somebody can walk by you with a flogger in their hand, with the energy of, I'm trying to do it right, and I'm trying to be sexy, and don't you find me sexy? And you might not have your body might not respond at all. Somebody can walk by you with a flogger in their hand with deep attention and intention, feeling incredibly confident in themselves, feeling like I am magnetic and you are going to pay attention to me and you are going to wait for me and you are going to feel me walking slowly by you, just holding this in my hand, not even doing anything with it. And your body can respond completely differently to the first person. And it could even be the same person, just walking by you with different energy. Okay, so you need to talk about energy. What energy do you want? What energy do you not want? What opens you up? What shuts you down? Number 4, aftercare is part of the discussion. That is, you'll see that in every credible BDSM negotiation guidance document. It is not an afterthought. How do you want to land after this experience? What do you need from your partner after intensity? Notice and think in advance about what's going to make me feel comforted and safe after this experience. What's going to make me feel safe that I went into a top or a dominant role? What's going to reassure me that it's okay? What's going to help me switch gears back to normal life, right? What's it going to take for you to come out of subspace? What do you need your partner to do to help you ground yourself? What do you need to know and how do you need to be reassured that it's not going to carry over into regular life, right? What do you need for your aftercare? Now notice, yes, there's all kinds of details about negotiation discussions. I'm not trying to, tell you how to create safe words here. That is something you should obviously do. That is absolutely part of the negotiation plan. I'm not giving you the step-by-step. I'm going to link to some of those kinds of things in the show notes. There's a lot of resources out there. What I'm trying to do is help you expand it so that you can see how to make it sexy. A lot of those resources don't really focus on making it sexy, they just focus on the bare bones and the how-to. But I want you to make sure that you know what you need to make it sexy so that you actually do it and you have fun with it and you don't skip it. All right. So another, just a couple notes on this, which I think is 5 and 6, right? So aftercare was 4. Number 5, let the conversation be intimate. Set up the scene for you to have the conversation. Don't do it like, over a greasy plate of French fries at a diner unless that really, floats your boat. Have it be intimate. Let yourself be turned on. Let yourself talk slowly. Let yourself be in your body. Let yourself not be coming off of a bunch of anxiety, right, into the conversation. Really take your time. Allow the negotiation and play boundary to kind of blur. So allow it to be playful when you're talking about it. Last one, number 6, context matters, right? So know what you're trying to build. Just as, I mentioned you can play with power dynamics without sex, and definitely I recommend that in the beginning. Know that, a Saturday night playtime scene is really different from a dynamic that is meant to structure your whole relationship. And you want to really be clear about, okay, what are we doing here? When is this? And when does it end, right? And is this something that we want to explore on an ongoing basis, or are we just talking about dipping our toes in? Really get detailed about all the contexts. So I want to just wrap up today. We've talked about, just with a little recap, we've talked about why we crave it, why we crave power dynamics, play, identity, freedom, stepping outside our everyday selves. Talked a little bit about terminology, top, bottom, dom, sub, how to find a community that can teach you more. We've talked about what the negotiation actually is. It's not about just doing paperwork. It's about setting the whole sexy container in the first scene and creating safety, right? We talked about what's at stake when you skip it and why it's so important for the bottom or the sub to take ownership as well as the top. And we also talked a little bit about how to make it hot, right? Desire forward, identity forward, energy, aftercare. And so I want to just invite you, as you go off into the rest of your lives today, ask yourself, what do I actually want from power play if I want to play with that? Am I curious about that? But what is it that I'm actually looking for? What is the experience? How do I want to feel, right? And have I ever said that out loud to my partner, if you have one, or any partner, if you've ever played with this or considered playing with it with people you're dating? Just start there. Start with, how do I actually want to feel? Who do I want to be, right? What do I really want from this? That's the first place to start with yourself. All right, my dears, I will see you here next week. Hey, before you go, if you enjoyed this show, I want to invite you to check out one of my favorite things that I've ever created. It's a free guide called Get Out of Your Head, a starter guide to releasing the pressure, shame, and shoulds around intimacy. It has 4 reflection exercises that go deeper than anything you'll find in a typical freebie, and most people feel a shift just after part 1. So go grab it at laurajergens.com/guide. The link is in the show notes. And if you're ready to find out what your specific path looks like, I'd love to talk to you. Booking info is also in the show notes, and I will see you here next week.